Okay, so we'll start in about 1 more minute. Okay, so we'll get started. So first, we're gonna go over the homework that you guys had to do last class. So Sneha will go over that with you, and then we can start going over what we're gonna learn this week. Okay.
Okay, so I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. Okay, for some reason it's not letting me share my screen. Ashiza, do you want to share yours? It's in the like the answers are in the folder, and I can just go over that if you want.
Let me open it up.
Oh wait, never mind, I got it. Okay, so this was a homework from last week. I saw a lot of people submitted it like right now. If you like, it's fine if you submit it a little late. We just didn't get a chance to grade it. So after this class, we'll be going over that. Also, another thing before we go over the answers for the independent project proposals, a lot of you had some really good ideas. Like you guys have like really great ideas for that. Just make sure to like come up with your own ideas and try to like be creative and unique about it. Don't like copy anything from the internet. Just use your own ideas and stuff. And also, another thing we wanted to mention that if you guys all do all your assignments and stuff and complete them and all that stuff, if you get like you just like keep completing the assignments, we're gonna be giving out certificates of completion at the end of this course. So you can just like have that if you want to like show your school or something that like you completed a Python course. Okay, so this is a week 1 homework. Okay, so number 1 was name one thing programmers instruct computers to do. And so there was a lot of answers you could put for this. I just put a few examples, which would be to accept a number, to divide 2 numbers, and to display the result of calculations. There's also a lot of other acceptable answers, and if you have any questions about like if your answers were right, I think we can go over that if you have any specific questions. So for number 2, it was what is a language computers communicate in and what makes up this language? So the answer was C, machine language, comma, instruction list. So basically the language is machine language and instruction list or IL is what makes up this language. Number 3 was who is the founder of Python? And the answer was C, Guido van Rossum. We went over that in the last week. And number 4 was Python is used to create cloud storage and search engines, true or false? The answer was true. Python can be used to create like search engines like Google or Bing and also like cloud storage and stuff. Okay, so now number 5 of number 6, you guys had to write your own code or like write output. So for number 5, the output you should have received if you put this statement in Replit was my favorite day is, and then like the line break, and then on the next line it should say Friday. So that was that. And then number 6, you had to write a code statement that would print the temperature next Monday will be 97 degrees. So there's a lot of ways that you could have done this. 2 examples I put here were number 1 would just be to use that new line character in the middle. Number 2, you could have put 2 print statements. As we talked about, there were multiple ways to create a new line. So this is one way of creating a new line, and writing 2 print statements is also another way of creating 2 lines like back to back. So yeah, so that was the week 1 homework. If you guys have any questions, just let us know. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and we can get started with this week's lesson.
Yeah, and also to clarify, like for the homework assignments, try to complete it like by the week, but it's fine for this week. We'll just grade it like even if it's late. And like to get the certificate, like you guys have to get like over an 80% overall in the whole course. So that's like the cutoff, and then we can give you the certificate. So let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, so let's present. Cool. So this week we're going to be learning about expressions in arithmetic and also conditional statements. So we'll get started. Okay. So first of all, I know you guys like used comments last week to like annotate the code and everything, but just for like a formal lesson on it. So why are comments important? They're very important while coding because you can like, suppose you like leave a program, you don't work on it for a couple of days and you come back to it. It's really important that you know what it says later on, because after some time you might forget like how exactly you coded that part or which part is responsible for what function of the program. So if you annotate or comment your code out, then you can come back and like know what it's doing. Or like I know some of you are working with other people on your individual project, so that way like once you share your code, you're going to be able to know what the person did exactly. So it's very important that you understand the other person's code as well. So comments really help in communication and also like remembering what you did. So let me like go on to REPL and I'll show you guys like a comment demo. Okay. So you guys can see my screen, right? Okay. So as you can see, I know some of you asked like, what is like a multi-line comment or like a single line comment? Like how do you differentiate between them? So like a single line comment would be like using a hash. It's like shift 3 on a Mac, I guess. Like here I just wrote like comments are very important in coding, and as you can see it's single line comment. So multi-line comments would be like 3 apostrophes to begin with and then 3 apostrophes to end. So they also like comments help you understand your code later, and that's just like explanations. So let's see a demonstration. Suppose we make an int called num and we initialize it to 10. Okay, and then maybe later we want to add 5. So like when I do like plus equals 5, that's basically a shortcut. Like instead I can just say like num equals num plus 5. That's the same thing. Do you guys see how I use that shortcut plus equals? It's basically saying that I'm going to add 5 onto the previous num. So right now with that statement, num is going to be 15. Okay, so we'll just print num. And if we run, it's going to print out 15, right? Because num is 15 because we added on 5. But suppose I don't want to do that anymore. Then I comment it out, right? And if I run it again, you see that it's still 10. Why? Because the code, when it's running, it does not take into account the line that is commented out. So whenever you comment out a code or like a piece of the code, you're basically telling the program not to run that code, but instead it is for you to understand it. So it's just for you to come back later and look at it and say, oh, okay, that's what I did, right? And to make it like how I would usually do it, like you can probably put on the next line or the previous line, but I just like putting it on the same line. So I go like this, and I put like a hash after, and I say initializing num to 10. So I know what I'm doing there, right? And then here, suppose I later forget like what plus equals means, then I do like adding 5 to num. So I can come back and I know what that means, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Does anybody have any questions? And sometimes like later when you guys get into like functions, you're probably gonna have to like look at, oh, what does that function do? So that in that case, like a single line comment probably won't be enough. So you might need like a multi-line comment saying, this function finds the largest number, right? And then you can maybe also say, it looks at, it uses conditional statements or something like that, right? So you have like multiple things you want to say about that piece of code, and you end it with 3 apostrophes later too. So then that part won't run. And you can also like notice what parts commented, and you can see the colors, right? So like a multi-line comment is usually in like red, and single lines are like in gray. That's just something interesting there. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. Oh, wrong slide. Okay. So let's next one. Okay, so now we're going to go into the main part of this week, which is basically arithmetic symbols used in Python. So whenever you guys want to perform calculations, like on a calculator or something, right? You have like a multiplication, you have division, subtraction, addition, but some things even your calculator can't do, right? Like your calculator can't do mod. So mod is basically like the remainder. So I know many of you are like young, like 6th grade, 7th grade maybe. So you guys don't really know what modulus is. So let me explain that to you guys. So modulus is basically when you're trying to find the remainder of something. So in the example here, I have 4 mod 2. I'll explain what the percent exactly means later, but so 4 mod 2 means what is the remainder when I divide 4 by 2? 4 is divisible by 2, right? So there's gonna be no remainder, so that's why it's 0. But what if I did 4 mod 3? What is the remainder when 4 is divided by 3? Can somebody tell me in the comments?
1.
1, right? Yeah, so then the output would be 1. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So in Python, like you can't use an X, right? That's not the multiplication symbol in Python. X would instead be used to like denote a variable of something. Like you might say X equals 10. So you can't use X, but instead the operator used in Python when you're coding is the star. So like if you're on a Mac, you could see like shift 8, like the symbol like above the 8 on a computer would be like the star, right? So if you do like 4 star 2, then you would get 8, right? As your output, because you're just multiplying it. And then division would be like 4 divided by 2 equals 2, right? Subtraction, 4 minus 2. That's basically all pretty straightforward, right? Addition, 4 plus 2. And that's the modulus. We went over that right now. And the symbol for that would be like a percent sign. So like shift 5. And then exponent. Okay, so an exponent, like usually whenever you're like guys are like writing like on a document or something, I know many of you use like a caret, right? Like shift 6, like a caret, like 4 caret 2 to denote like an exponent, like 4 raised to the power 2. But when you're coding, you don't want to do that. So make sure you don't like forget that because you might get an error. You want to do 4 star star 2. Because if you think about it like logically, exponents are like basically the next level for multiplication, right? So that's why I just think about it like double multiplication, like star star 2. Like that's how I remember it. Okay, so 4 star star 2 or 4 squared would be 16, and that's your output there, right? And then floor division, or basically integer division. This is another aspect. So when you divide like 5 over 2, you would get 2.5, right? Technically. But if you want to round down, right, and you don't want a decimal, but you want the closest integer down, then that's floor division. So you use like 2 slashes of division, right? So 5//2 would give you 2, because that's the lowest, that's the closest integer rounded down. So instead of 2.5, you have 2. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, any questions? If you have any questions, just like feel free to speak up, okay? So let's do a demo on this one too, just so you guys understand. Okay, so let's go back. Okay. So let's see. So you guys can like code along with me so like you guys can get the feel of it too, okay? So let's say we have num. Okay, I'm just gonna name it num. 10 star star 2. What do you guys think the output of this one would be? Anybody want to tell me the answer? Just like shout out. I can't see the chat right now.
100.
100. Okay, so let's see. Let's print. Yeah, it's 100, right? What about 10//3? Anybody know? I can't see the comments right now, so if you guys want to just tell me out loud.
3.
3. Okay, let's see. Let's run it. Yeah, because 10 divided by 3 is going to be like 3.3333 or something like that, right? So then we know that the closest number is going to be 3 because 9 divided by 3 is then 3. Let's see what else. 4 times 2 maybe. I already did that one on the slides, but that would be 8, right? So that's just how that works. Does everybody understand arithmetic operations? Pretty simple, right, so far? Yeah? Okay. Let's see. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so now it's going to be your turn to try to write a program. So you guys are going to write a program that finds the remainder of 4 raised to the 4th power divided by 6. And you're going to print out the statement in your code or in your program, and you're going to type your answer in the chat box. I purposely made it so that you guys can't use a calculator because the calculator won't give you the remainder. It's just going to give you like in a decimal, right? So you guys have to write your own code that finds the remainder of 4 raised to the 4th power. So like 4 to the 4th power divided by 6, and what's the remainder? So if you guys, I'll give you guys about 5 minutes to do that, and I'll check the answers in the chat box and I'll tell you guys the right answer, and then we'll look at the solution. Okay, sound good? Okay, I'll give you, so we're gonna come back at like 1:21. And if you guys have any questions, type it in the chat box so we can get back to you on that. So like 1 more minute. Okay, so we're gonna go over the solution now. So a lot of you did get the right answer. So let me just show you guys exactly what I did. And then we're also gonna comment out the code together. because I already have the solution written, but I want to comment it out with you guys. So then you guys can also see like the importance of comments at the same time. Now let's see. Okay, here. Okay. Also, one other thing that I like to do, I want to tell you guys. So in like on your code, whenever you guys are coding, before you start, always like comment out like your name. You're gonna write your name out, right? And then also the date. So you can come back and like, you know, oh, okay, I worked on this time and I'm gonna add on at this time. So it's just like a, I guess like something I always do. So if you guys wanna do that too, it's pretty good. Okay, so I divided or like I separated it into like 2 parts just so I can like read it better. So I first created a variable called power, and on this one, I initialized it to the raised to the power of 4, or 4 star star 4, right? So that's basically gonna give me 4 to the power of 4, right? And then to find the remainder, I used the modulus function, which is like the percent sign. So I did power percent 6. So that would give me the remainder when divided by 6. And that's basically all we had to do. And then I just printed out remainder because that's the final calculation that I did, right? And some of you also just like did it. So if you like run it, then you see the answer is 4. And some of you also just did it like all together, maybe. So you can do like answer equals. I like doing parentheses, so like you can always, the code knows what it's doing exactly, and then you can also follow it better if you do parentheses, and it's like less likely to make mistakes that way. Something like that, maybe. Okay, and then here we'll just print like answer. Yep, see 4. So both ways work, right? So then who wants to help me comment this out? So what can I write here? Somebody else want to shout it out? Like what can I write here to describe what that line is doing?
Maybe like finds the power of 4 to the 4th.
Yeah. Good, right? Okay, good. What about this one? Anybody know?
Finds the remainder.
Keep saying hi.
Finds the remainder of.
Yeah, good. So finds the remainder. Or like maybe even like final answer. That's the final answer to our program, right? And this we can just maybe like do alternate solution in one line or something like that, okay? And then this one just like print final or output. Does everybody understand that code? Everybody got it? Does it make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we'll go back to the slides. Okay, so next we're gonna do operators. So operators are really important, like when you get into if statements, like you might do like if her age is greater than 10, then print she is a teenager or something like that. Well, that's not right, but you guys know what I mean, right? So it's just, you're gonna use them in conditional statements. So we'll get to that later, but right now we're just gonna learn about the operators in specific. So these is like the vocabulary, or like the vocab basically. So operand, then operator, and then another operand. So in this example, like 3 is less than 6. The operand would be 3. Wait, I'm just curious, can you guys see my cursor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So the operand would be 3. The operator would be the less than sign, and then the second operand would be 6. So here's like a picture of all the different comparison operators in Python. So there's a less than symbol, a greater than symbol, a less than or equal to symbol. Like usually in math, when you're doing a less than or equal to, you usually have like the less than sign and then a bar on the bottom, right? But then you can't really do that, like when you're typing, you can't have a bar on the bottom. So instead you just use like a less than and then an equal to sign like right next to it, okay? And there's a greater than or equal to, an equal to. So instead of for an equal to, like you guys know how when you're initializing a variable, you usually do like x equals 10, right? So when you're comparing something, you can't really do like if 2 equals 3, because that doesn't make sense. Like that's like you're initializing something, or you're setting the value of something to something else. But you don't want to confuse the program by like using like the equal sign, right? So instead, when you're comparing something, you're going to use 2 equal signs. So it's going to be like if 2 equals 3, right? And that would be false, right? And then the last one is not equal to. So like if 2 is not equal to 3, then use like an exclamation mark right before the equal sign. So it'd be like if 2 is not equal to 3, print that's the number is not 3 or something like that, right? Okay, so operators, one thing you have to know is they're Boolean statements like you guys learned last week, so they return true or false. So in this example, like 3 is less than 6, it's gonna return true, right? Okay, let's go on to the next one. So next is logical operators. So logical operators, they also return true or false, and they're usually used in conjunction or with comparison operators. So there's like and, or, and not. So, and there's more too, but these are like the main ones. And the ones that you guys will most likely use in your code like a lot of the time is just gonna be and or. So in Python, when you're coding, like in Java, it's a bit different. Like this is where a lot of people say that Python is easier than Java, because if any of you guys know Java, in Java, you have to use like the and symbol on your computer like twice, like and, right? And like or would be like the 2 bars, right? But in Python, it's pretty straightforward. You don't have to memorize all that syntax. Instead, you just have to write out or type out the word and, like A-N-D. So here I wrote like 2 is greater than 0 and 3 is greater than 0, and that's going to return true. So and basically checks if both of the statements written both have to be true for the overall expression to return true, right? Okay. And then the or you have to write out or. So that's basically here I say 2 is greater than 0 or 3 is less than 0. That's still going to return true. So what's happening with or is that if either one of the statements, the both don't have to be like true. If either one of them is true, you're going to return true. But if both are true, it's still going to return true. So as long as at least one of them is true, the overall expression is going to return true. And is both of them have to be true to return true. So remember that, okay? Remember that distinction. Okay, finally not. You guys are probably not going to use this as much, but here it is anyway. So like not, and then in parentheses, because you want to make it sure that the whole expression is the not, right? Not 2 greater than 0 and 3 greater than 0 is going to return false. Why? So, okay, so let's look at the inside part first. So when we have like 2 is greater than 0 and 3 is greater than 0, like if you guys just look just at that part, right, it's going to return true, right? Because both of the statements are true, and if you're using an and, that's going to return true. But the not then reverses that. It's going to give the opposite output. That's how I think about it. So so basically you're saying not true, so the opposite of true is going to be false. So it's going to return false, right? But another thing, like just like saying it again, you guys are probably not going to use this as much, but I guess if you want, you can still use it, because another way to do it, if you would just like say like 2 is less than or equal to 0, like you just reverse the comparison operators instead of using the not operator. But sometimes this may work like to be simpler in your code, so that's just one thing I'm teaching you guys. And okay, so if you guys look at this like flow chart I have here, so let's just walk through it. So we have 2 variables, x and y, okay? And I think x and y are booleans, okay? So here we go. So x equals true, right? That's like the first thing that we're given. X equals true. So if that statement is false, so if x is actually false, then you're gonna get a false output. Because remember for and, both of them have to be true, right? So if you find out that one of them is false, automatically the whole statement is gonna be false, right? So, but instead if x equals true, that's good. Okay, fine, we got through the first step. So now we have to check the other variable, y. So if y is equal to true, if it's not, then if it's false, then it'll give you a false output. But if it is true, then it's going to give you a true output. So that means the whole statement x and y is going to return true. But suppose if instead of and, it was or, right? Then it would be, okay, x equals true, then it's automatically going to return true, right? But if x equals false, then it's going to check for y. And if y equals true, it's still going to return true. Because for an or statement, it can be either one. Just at least one of them has to return true. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? I know that was like a lot of talking at once. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to just like open up your mic and just ask them to me like right now. Did everybody understand everything I said?
What does not do?
So not, oh, sorry, okay. Okay, so not basically just reverses the output. So like if you look at the inside statement, right, like 2 is greater than 0 and 3 is greater than 0, what do you think that will give you? Like ignore the not for now, just 2 is greater than 0 and 3 is greater than 0. What does that return? Anybody? No?
True.
Yeah, it would return true. So then basically not just reverses that. So I know the inside statement returns true, right? But then if you're saying not that, then the overall thing is going to return false. It's just going to give you the opposite of what's the inside statement is going to be. Does that make sense? Does that make better sense now? Whoever asked me the question.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Any other questions about anything like comparison operators or logical operators? Everybody's good? Let me look at the chat. Okay, somebody asked, is not an exclamation mark. Okay, so they're different things, right? Logical operators, this is like the logical operator not, right? And then here, the not equals to would be an exclamation mark. And sometimes, yes, you do use an exclamation mark for the not as well. So that's why I said that you probably won't be using this one that much. Okay, any other questions? Everybody good? Everybody's good? Okay, so let's do a demo now on Rebel. Okay. Okay, so here I have a not example opened up right now. So let's do this, okay, to explain it better. Let's print 2 is greater than 0 and 3 is greater than 0. Any guesses as to what that will return? Let's write the comment out. So what do you guys think that will return? 2 is greater than 0 and 3 is greater than 0. Anybody know?
True.
True, good. So returns true, right? But then the not statement is going to reverse that. See how the insides are the same here, right? So if that part returns true, the not statement is going to reverse it, and you're going to write returns false, right? So let's check and see if we're right. So it's going to be true and then false. Yep, see, we're right. True and then false. Let's do that. Okay, so right now I'm just showing you guys the printed out statements of it, and I'm showing you guys as Booleans what they would return. But later on, we're gonna learn that conditional statements, like if-else statements, actually use the operators to decide if they're gonna run that specific part of code. So you're gonna be able to like select exactly like what you want to run in your program depending on what circumstances, right? So let's take some more examples. Print maybe 3 is less than 0 or 2 is greater than 0. So can you guys just like type out in the chat what do you guys think this will return?
True.
Yeah, it's gonna return true. Oh. Okay, let's see. Yeah, it's true. So why is it true? Because one of them satisfies the condition, right? Yes, 3 is less than 0 is a false statement, but 2 is greater than 0 is a true statement. And if we're using or, just one of them has to be true for the whole thing to be true. So that's why it's gonna return true, right? Let's use another one. Oh, how about this? Print 2 is less than or equal to, so I'm using the less than or equal to sign. So as you guys can see here, like less than or equal to, I'm using the equal sign after the less than, right? Print 2 is less than or equal to 0, and 4 is greater than or equal to 4. So what do you guys think this will return? In the chat, just like type it out.
False.
False, good. Because an and requires both of them to be true, right? And only one of them is true. Only the 4 is greater than or equal to 4 is true. So that's why it's gonna return false. Yep, we're right, okay? So what if instead we change this to an or, then what would it return?
True.
True, good. Yep, okay. Now let's try a not equals. What do you guys think this will return? Yep, it's gonna return false. So, yeah, because both of them are not true, right? 2 is not less than or equal to 0, and 4 is not equal to 4, right? Because 4 is equal to 4. So because both of them are false, the overall statement is gonna be false. Okay, does that make sense to everybody now? Everybody good on like operators in general, comparison and logical? Any questions at all?
Is there XOR?
What? I can't hear you, sorry.
Is there exclusive OR?
Yes, there is. But like these are like the main ones. So we're not gonna get into that too much right now, but maybe like later after class we can talk to you over like Google Classroom and answer the questions about that too. Because usually you're just gonna use like these three in your code. Okay. So maybe you can like just ask us on the Google Classroom chat and we'll get to you in that. Okay, does it sound good? Okay. So you guys have another practice lab. I'll give you another 5 minutes to do this one. So write and run a Python program that takes the temperature in Celsius and converts and outputs the temperature in Fahrenheit. Okay, and this is the formula for conversion from Celsius to Fahrenheit. Okay, and then after that, you guys are gonna have a second step. So you're gonna print true if the output is greater than 50, otherwise it's gonna print out false. Okay, so if you guys think about it carefully, you don't have to use an if-else statement here. I'm just asking you to print it out, right? So, and I want the initial temperature in Celsius, I want you guys to initialize the variable to 40. Okay, so I'll give you guys about 5 minutes to do this one. So we'll get back together at 1:42.
Somebody asked, what do you want the initial value of Celsius to be?
I want it to be 40. It's just set Celsius equals to 40 in the beginning.
I don't get it.
Okay, what part are you confused about?
The Fahrenheit part.
Okay, so basically for that part, you're gonna try to want to use the arithmetic examples that we did in the beginning. So you see the formula like Fahrenheit equals 9/5 Celsius plus 32. Once you get your Celsius, you're basically gonna put that into the formula. So what you're gonna write like Celsius equals 40, and then you're gonna put it into the formula. You're gonna say like 9/5 times Celsius plus 32, and you're gonna initialize another variable called Fahrenheit, and you're gonna just set that equal to that. So it's just like arithmetic.
Okay.
Does that make more sense?
Yes.
Okay, and we'll go over it too, so you can like check. It'll probably make more sense then, because it's like the first time you guys are seeing this. So. Okay, somebody asked, you guys need to make an if statement. No, you don't have to use, you do not have to make an if statement. So there's another way to do it, because I'm just asking you to print out if the output is greater or not, right? So this is kind of like an introduction to if statements, I guess you can say. But no, you do not have to make an if statement yet. Okay. Try to think, guys. Try to think how you can print out if it's true or not without using an if statement. This is where programming gets like really fun, like when you're thinking about the logic and stuff. So try to think about how you can do this without an if statement if you don't know what if you do not know what an if statement is. Okay. About 2 more minutes. And then you guys are gonna help me comment out the solution code, okay? 1 more minute. This is a bit harder than the last one. Looking at the comments, I think most of you guys are just stuck on like the last step or the second step. So I'll explain that to you. So as just a reminder, like, as you guys are learning this, try to also at the same time think about, oh, what aspects of like my personal project can I use this to, right? And then try to think about how you can use that. So like for this week's homework, you want to complete the homework I give you. Of course, that one has to be done. And also try to come up with like the next step in your individual project, right? So maybe another assignment that we might assign is that how can this week's material help you in the individual projects? You have to just like type something up or like a piece of sample code, maybe even just so like you guys can submit that to us and we can see like how this is going to be incorporated into your project. Does that sound good? Okay. So we're going to go over it now. Let's go to Rebel. Okay, so here it is, temperature converter. So what I am basically doing is, so I have the first step and the second step laid out, right? So first I did initialize Celsius to 40. So what can I comment this out as? Anybody want to tell me what I can like write this for the comment?
Initial temperature.
Yeah, initialize temperature in Celsius maybe. Okay. Wait, just a question. Is my mic fine? Like, can you guys hear me okay? Or am I too quiet?
You're good.
You're good.
Okay.
I can hear you.
So the next step is Fahrenheit. So I just named it like FAH because it's a shorter form. I don't want to write Fahrenheit out every single time. So that's another technique. Like you guys might not want to write the whole variable name if you're going to be using it a lot later in the code. So maybe just start like a shortened version of it, right? So FAH equals, so I always, like whenever I'm doing like a big string of calculations, I always like to separate it with parentheses just so I'm like less prone to making errors, right? So I have the 9/5 in parentheses because that's one calculation, right? Because that's like a fraction, right? So it's probably going to convert it to a decimal before it does the rest. So I have 9/5 and then times Celsius, right? Because I have that initialized. And then I have parentheses over that plus 32. So one thing I want to point out here is why did I not just write, like, why did I not do that step? Like, why did I not just do like ignoring that step and just writing 40 here? What would be a problem with this one? What would be a limitation? Anybody know like the limitation or like the problem with this thing? Like instead of initializing it first, why just putting it into the equation? Any guesses?
If you ever had to reuse Celsius, you have to keep typing 40. Or if you ever had to change the value of Celsius, you would have to like type it all like everywhere wherever you use the value. So instead of doing that, use a variable, you just have to change the value in one place.
Yeah, that's good. That's exactly right. So like if I do 40 here, like suppose I want to instead change Celsius, I want to find it when it's 0 degrees, right? Then I have to go and find it in the equation and then find it wherever else I use that value, right? And I want to change each of those 40s to zeros. But the smarter way to do it would just be, if you know Celsius is a value that you want to be changing later, would just be to create a variable Celsius, right? And then use that variable everywhere else. So suppose if I want to change the 40 to like 50 later, then I can just type it in here and it's going to use that value for everywhere else in the code. This is like a good coding technique. You want to set it in everything to variables. So in case you want to use it later, you can just call the variable name instead of actually calling, like actually changing all of the numbers everywhere, right? So, but like in 9/5 case, like for the case of like 9/5, that's like a fixed value, right? Like that's part of the formula. There's nothing that you're going to be changing there. It's not a variable, right? A variable is something that you can change. That's because that's not a variable. You don't have to like set that value or like set a name to that value, right? You can just leave that there. But Celsius is something that we're going to be changing. So you want to put like a variable name to the 50, right? So I said 40, right? Yeah, okay. So let's check the output. Yes, it returns true. So now let's go to this one. Who can comment out this line? What would we say? Any ideas? Any ideas as to like what we can comment this line out as?
Temperature conversion.
Yeah, temperature conversion. Okay, good. So now the next step, this is the second step. Many of you guys were like stuck on this part. Like I know most of you guys would like usually use like a if statement, right? But just as an introduction to if statements, I included this part. So you don't actually need an if statement because all I'm asking you to do is print out true or false. So instead I'm just writing like print FAH is greater than 50. So what this is gonna do is if it is greater than 50, it's gonna print out true. But if it's not greater than 50, it's gonna print out false. So let's use another variable. Let's use like 0, okay? Turns out the Fahrenheit is not greater than 50. So it's gonna print out false instead of true. Does that make sense to everybody? So here I'm just gonna write print if greater. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody have any questions on this at all? Everybody's good? Everybody understand it? Okay, cool. I'm gonna take the silence as no questions. Okay, so next we're gonna go on to conditional statements. So this is like the if, else, elif, right? So we're gonna get into that. So if statements, all the operators we learned about and the Booleans that all we like learned about, like the comparison, the logical operators, they become really important here because you're gonna use them like inside the if brackets. So let's look at this example here, okay? So we have if 2 is less than 3, it's gonna print out, yes, 2 is less than 3. So what it's basically doing is if the part that's inside the if statement is true, it's gonna execute that part inside that code, like that little section right here. Oh my God, okay, wait a second. Like right here, you guys see my cursor, right? So like this part, it's gonna execute the part that's inside the if statement, right? And then you see print done. So after it's just gonna print done. So the output would look something like, yes, 2 is less than 3, and then done, right? So let's look at the demo. Actually, I'll move on and come back to the demo. So if you like see this like flow chart, it's like an if condition, right? So if the if condition is true, it's gonna execute the statement or the operation inside, and then it's gonna move on to the next line of code. But if it's false, it's automatically gonna move on to the next line of code. So it's not gonna execute the part inside. So suppose instead of 2, like we had 4 here. So if 4 is less than 3, that's a false statement, right? So it's gonna ignore this part and it's just gonna print done. Does that make sense to everybody? But what if instead, like if 4 is not less than 3, what if we wanted to include like another part that says, no, 4 is not less than 3? Like what if we wanted to include like another alternative? So that's where we use else statements, right? So if you want an alternative like printing out, like a print statement or something like an alternative output, you can use an else. So like if you look at this example, if grade is greater than or equal to 80, you're gonna print out distinction. And then you have a bunch of alternatives, right? But if you only have one alternative, you can directly use an else. But if you have multiple alternatives, you can use elif. Elif is basically short for else if. Like if you're using like Java, you would usually write like else if. So then you're printing out like another statement or like another condition, right? So else if grade is greater than or equal to 70, you're gonna print merit, right? And then you have other conditions too. So let's run through this example here, right? Suppose you have a grade that's like 80, right? It's gonna print out distinction, right? Because the first statement is satisfied. The first if statement is gonna return true, right? And if you have like suppose grade 75, it's gonna print out the merit. It's gonna go to the second statement because you know the first one's gonna be false, right? So then it's gonna move on to the second one or the elif. Elif grade is greater than or equal to 70, and then it's gonna print out merit. And then 50 is gonna be fail because none of the first 3 gets satisfied, right? All of them are false. So the last one is basically saying if none of those are true, then the last one, this is like the resort to last option kind of thing. So that's why it doesn't have a condition, it's just else. Because if all those are not true, then it's gonna move on to this one. That's why else's are always gonna be at the end of your like whole like segment of code with the if, else, if, and the else statements. So once it goes into one of the statements, it does not go to the rest. That's really important. Like suppose if the first statement is satisfied, right? Like if grade is greater than or equal to 80, it's gonna print out distinction. But that also means it's gonna go out of this like whole loop of elifs and elses. Because it won't make sense if it goes into one of them, right? Because that defeats the whole purpose of like segmenting out the code. So suppose it goes into the first one, it's automatically going to move on to the next statement outside of this whole loop of things, right? So that's just one thing. Okay, so now let's go into the demo on Replit. First of all, any questions on that? Like, did everybody understand it? If you guys have any questions, I know that was like a lot of talking, so you guys just like feel free to open your mics and ask a question.
Does indentation matter there?
Indentation does matter in Python, especially. It does definitely matter. And you're gonna write like if grade is greater than or equal to 80, and you have to write like a colon and then indentation. Like I know that REPL automatically indents it for you, so that's like one good thing, but like yes, indentation is important. Like I know in Java it's not that important because you have like the brackets, right? But in Python, one thing that makes the code simpler with syntax is that you don't have to use the brackets. You can use the colon, but then you do have to indent it. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? That was a good question. No? Okay. Okay, so I have an example here, right? If 2 is greater than 3, you're going to print out high. Else if, or elif, 2 is equal to 3. Remember how I use equal for equals instead of just equal, right? Then it's going to print out by, and then maybe I can have a final statement. Else, what can I say? Maybe like print, like I can just say like 2 is greater than 3 maybe. That's basically what the alternative is, right? So if I run this, it's gonna print out 2 is greater than 3. Because the first one, this is not true, right? So that means it's not gonna execute this statement. It's gonna skip over that statement and it's gonna go to the next statement, else if. Is this one true? This is also not true, right? 2 is not equal to 3. So it's also gonna be not true. So that means it's gonna go to the next statement. And the next statement, there's no condition, right? It's basically just saying that if the first 2 are not true, it's gonna go to this statement. So it's gonna print out 2 is greater than 3. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So let's see, let's try something else. Let's like make a variable, num equals 10. So I can maybe write like, if num is, oh, okay, let's do this. Suppose I wanna check if it's divisible by 2 or like if it's an even number. How would I do that? Huh? What'd you say?
Modulus.
Yeah, you use modulus. So you like num modulus 2 equals 0. So basically what I'm saying here is if the number is divided by 2 and you get no remainder, then that means it's basically even, right? So that's how you would code that like expression in Python. And use a colon. See how it automatically indents it? So that's like one thing I just wanted to point out. Okay. So if it's even, you're gonna print maybe num is even. And then you can also do like, then you can maybe just write your else statement because there's nothing else other than even, right? If it's not even, it would just be odd. So then you're gonna write num is odd. So here I'm using a variable, right? So this is also important because num is something I want to change. So I'm plugging in that num into the if statement. So if I run this right now, it's gonna print out num is even. But what if I change the num to 11? What would it print out now? Anybody know? What would it print out if I have num equals 11?
That was odd.
I should just, sorry, some people have some questions. Somebody wanted to go back to the other if statement, or like they didn't finish writing the code, so maybe just like slow down a little.
Okay, which one? The temp converter? Oh, the first part, like the first example in this one?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'll just like write it at the top here.
Yeah, and they said go back to else elif too.
Okay. I think And then once again, going through this again, this is going to return, this is going to be not true, right? So that means this statement is not executed. This is also going to be not true. This statement is also going to be not executed. And then this one, because it's the alternative to both of them, this is going to be what's going to be executed or printed out. Okay. Okay, so coming back to this example, what do you guys think the output would be if num is 11? Can somebody like tell me on the mic? I don't have the chat open right now. Anybody know?
Num is odd.
Yeah, num is odd, right? So let's check. See, okay, this is like an example of a multi-line comment. Like if I want to ignore that first part, I would just do like apostrophe, 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 and then here apostrophes again. So you see how it's going to just ignore that first part. It's going to only focus on the second example. So that's just an example of using multi-line comments. Okay.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So for the first part of the code, isn't the first line isn't line number 5 true?
2 is not less than 3 though. Oh, okay. I think I was supposed to. Okay, wait 1 second. Sorry, that's my mistake. I think I typed it back up wrong. Okay, so this is true. So that means this would be executed, right? So then all of these, it wouldn't matter. They would automatically not be executed. Does that make sense? Because once it goes into the first part, that means all of them are not going to be executed. Okay. So then, let's see. Yeah, it would print out high because it's going to go through the first one, right? I think before I had greater than, like previously, but I'll just keep it less than now. Okay. So let me just check these out. Okay, any other questions? Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, so for the second example, as you guys can see, num equals 11, num is odd because this part is gonna be not true this time. Right, so this is gonna be not executed. So this is gonna be the alternative, right? So that's gonna be this part of the code is gonna be executed. Okay, any questions at all about if, else, elif statements? Everybody's good? No questions at all? Let me check the chat just to make sure. Okay, somebody had a question. What is wrong with this? If 60 greater than or equal to 80, print pass, elif greater than or equal to 70. What are you trying to ask exactly? I don't understand.
I think the problem was that it didn't have like two values comparing. Like he wrote elif, yeah.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we'll move on then. Okay, so next we have a class lab. So I'll give you guys again 5 minutes to work on this one. So just follow the statements, right? I have like everything like labeled out, like what you guys have to do. So just follow that and write like a piece of code, okay? I'll give you guys about 5 minutes. It should be pretty simple, I think. Okay. So we're gonna come back at 2:05. About 2 more minutes. Okay, so we'll go over the answers now. Okay. Did everybody like get how to do this one a little? Sort of? Yeah. Okay. So here it is. So the first, I'm pretty sure the first like instruction was to initialize a variable like x to 8 and then y to 15, right? So that's what I did here. So I'm just gonna comment that out like this. So assign 8 to the variable x and 15 to the variable y. So I'll write that as a comment. So assign 8 to the variable x, right? And then here I'm assigning 15 to the variable y. Okay, and here are my if statements. They said print out 2 conditional statements, right? So I basically decided to do 2 if statements. So here I have if x is greater than 3 or y mod 2 is equal 0. So remember, like somebody asked, how do you know if it's even? How do you ask Python if it's even? So you would just do like y mod 2 equals 0. So what that's basically telling you is if whenever you divide y by 2, if the remainder is 0. Because anything divided by 2 is even, right? So that's how I did that part. So if x is greater than 3 or y is even, it's going to print out at least one of the conditions is satisfied, right? And then I have another if statement that says if x is less than or equal to 3 or y is not even. So for y is not even, I use the not equals to. I guess you can also use like the not logical operator, but this is why I said that you're probably not going to use not that often because most programmers just use like the exclamation mark equals or like the comparison operator not equals to. So like y mod 2 is not equal to 0. And that's going to print neither condition is satisfied. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, okay. So like when you run it, it's gonna print out. Okay. And then also if you wanna make it so that instead of being like this, it would be smarter to make it an else statement. Because that way you're telling the code that it's not gonna run the other one if the first one is satisfied. Okay. So if you run it like that, it's only gonna print one of them, right? Let's also try to think about, because you know how this one's like at least one of the conditions is satisfied and then neither condition is satisfied. Try to think about how you can make it to also check if both the conditions are satisfied. So I was thinking about this, and the smartest way to do this would be using an elif statement, right? So maybe in the beginning, instead of doing or, we can do and, right? And then you can do an elif, which has the same thing. So I'm just going to copy that. But instead, I'm going to use an or inside, right? So that's going to tell me this one is going to print at least one of the conditions satisfied, right? because an or would make sure that at least one of them is satisfied, and then else would be neither condition is satisfied. And then here it would be both of the conditions are satisfied. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions? Okay, and if you run this, it's gonna say at least one of them. And suppose I want to change this, so I can do like 814, then it would say both of the conditions are satisfied. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions at all about this topic?
When I'm putting it in repo.it, it's saying invalid syntax.
Make sure you use like the colon and make sure the number of parentheses match up. Like that's a very common problem. Like usually like you guys always like write like one more open parenthesis then one more closed parenthesis. So make sure the number of parentheses all match up. So you should have like the same number of open and the same number of closed parentheses, or left or right. Like if you look at my program here, I have 1, 2, 3 left parentheses and 3 right parentheses. So that's why it's okay. Like the number has to be the same. And also if you like hover over, like click on a parenthesis, it will like show the matching parentheses. So like that's something you can do too. Okay. Did that answer your question, or is there still a problem?
I think it answered the question.
Okay, cool. Any other questions about any of this stuff that we learned today? Anything at all? Okay, that was like the last thing for today's lesson, but I did add an extra thing. So I was gonna go over it if we have time, and we do have some more time left. So we're gonna go over it. Like a lot of your codes, or like I was looking at a lot of your like individual projects, they all have user input, right? So like you're always most of them say like, oh, you're gonna take in what the user says. Like for Mad Lib programs, for example, you're gonna ask the user, enter an adjective or something like that, right? So you're depending on the user to give you something. So how do you do that in Python? So this is called like user input, right? So basically you can initiate user input using the input built-in function. You guys didn't learn about built-in functions yet, but just don't worry about the exact like terminology about that yet, because we're gonna be learning that later. But just think about the syntax of this, right? So this would be the format. This is an example, like username equals input, enter username. So then the output would be like, it's gonna show up enter username, and then it's gonna print out the username. It's gonna print out whatever the user like entered into the computer. So here's another example. It says value equals input, please enter a string. And then it uses like a tab to like, that's like a new line character. So whatever you're gonna type in, or whatever the user is gonna type in, is gonna be on the next line. So that's basically what that's saying. And it's gonna print out you entered value, or like whatever they entered in, right? Okay, so please enter string Python is gonna be you entered Python. So let me show you a easier to understand example on REPL. Okay, my REPLs. Okay, so let's do user input demo. Okay. Let's use the username one. So we have username equals input, enter username, right? And then I'm gonna print out maybe your username is, and then I'm just gonna use like a plus, so I concatenate the string, username. Okay, so then look at what's gonna happen. So it's gonna do enter username. So right now it's depending on you to enter something in. So I'm just gonna write like Ashwita or something, okay? And it's gonna print out your username is Ashwita. Does that make sense? So it's basically it's assigning whatever the user or like the person who's using your program inputted, and it's gonna include that variable somewhere else. So like for a Mad Libs, for example, you guys might like write enter an adjective or something like that maybe. Okay, and then here you might write like your dog is really, and then an adjective, right? And then you just do like, let's change that to 3. Okay, so then let's see. So what's an adjective? Anybody come up with an adjective? What is an adjective you guys want me to put in?
Fluffy.
Yellow.
Huh?
How about like yellow or something?
Yellow? Okay, sure. yellow. And then I press the enter bar. So you have to press like the return on your computer for it to run through like the rest of it, right? So it's gonna print out your dog is really yellow. So does that make sense to everybody, how user input can be like really important, especially in like your individual projects? So I think like most projects need user input because that's what makes it like interactive, right? So that's important. So let me go back to the temperature converter, and let's look into how we can use user input on that one. Because we talked about how you might want to change the Celsius, right? So instead of like the programmer changing the Celsius every time, maybe you can make this like a user input thing. So you can do input, enter temperature in Celsius, right? Like that's something you can do. And then it just uses that Celsius later everywhere else. So let's run it. Here I can enter 40. Oh, what is that? Okay, let's do something else then.
40 would be a string in this case, right? Is that why?
Yeah, I think that's why. Okay, well, you can like use casting, but I don't want to get into that right now. Okay, let's do something else. Okay, then don't think about this example, but let's go back to the, because I don't want to introduce casting right now. Okay. Okay, so just here, let's think about another example. I know some of you guys were doing like story generators, right? So maybe you want to write like pick a path, okay? Maybe you can do pick a path, enter Y for going to the park, and enter N for going to the zoo or something like that, okay? So that's like a story generator thing, right? Let's do this as an answer. Okay, and then maybe you might want to use like an if statement later that says if answer, or like ANS, equals Y, okay? And then you can write print you are now in the zoo. Does that make sense? Like that's like something you do with like a story, but probably you guys are not going to use like you are now in the zoo. You might use like some other more like complicated thing later. You might have to go through like another function that says like, okay, now you're going to go on to the next step or something like that for like a story generator. Does that make sense? Yeah, so why do we use equals versus the plain equals? I talked about this before when I went over like the logical operator versus the comparison operator slide, right? So like usually when you're like initializing a statement, you would do like x equals 10, right? So you're assigning 10 to the x, but if I want to check like print 11 equals 10, if you want to like check, or if you want to return like a Boolean, you're going to use like 2 equal signs because you don't want the computer to confuse the two, right? So now it would return like false. Well, okay, I don't have that part coded. If I want to, let's do this. Right, so that would return false. See, and then the single equal sign is going to like assign a statement or like assign an expression value. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions on anything we learned today? Like anything at all? Let me look at the chat. Yeah. Any other questions on like anything we learned to like any of the slides, any topic? So I'll post the slides, the notes, and the homework on Google Classroom for you guys to look at, right? And then make sure you complete the homework before next class, and also complete like, write out like what you're gonna use like for your individual project. Like write out, okay, I'm gonna incorporate if statements in this fashion or like in this way. I'm gonna incorporate user input in this way. And maybe even write like a piece of sample code with that. Okay. Any other questions?
Do you want to go over user input, or like just somebody said they don't understand? If you want to just go over that like really quick one more time.
Oh, sure. Let me go over a simple example first. So,
Just like slow down a little bit.
okay. Let me see. Okay, let's do this one, okay? Let's go to the same example. So user input is basically just taking into account like what the user is saying. It's making your program more interactive, right? So username equals input. Like this is a syntax, this is how you write it, right? Enter username. So what's gonna happen here is when you do this, it's gonna print out on the console, it's gonna print out like enter username, and it's gonna wait for the user to like type in something. And then whatever you type in, it's gonna use that as the variable value, right? Once you press enter. And then basically what's gonna happen is whatever string you type in there, it's gonna assign that value to the variable username. And then you can use it later in your program. So I might say like print your username is, and it's gonna use that variable. And it's gonna print that out, right? So I have, let me run that statement. So enter username, I might enter like Ashwita, right? And I press enter. You have to press like the enter button so you can move on to the rest of it. So it knows that you're done typing. And it's gonna print out your username is Ashwita. So it's basically just using that part. Does that make more sense now?
When I do it, it just tells me it's wrong.
It's wrong? What like exact like error are you getting?
It says on the first line for the username equals input, enter username.
Mm-hmm. What error are you getting with it? Did you make sure you use like the quotation marks to don't, that's a string? Did you do that?
Yes.
Okay. What's wrong with your program then? Like, what is it saying?
Indentation error.
Make sure you don't have like any spaces like in front of it or anything.
Oh.
Did it get fixed now?
Yeah, it works now.
Okay, cool. Any other questions?
So I just did an if statement. So how, if you want to enter something, like if you enter a specific thing, then how do you make it so that the computer recognizes that you should say something, that you should output something after the user puts in a specific input?
Oh, so you're like saying how do you combine like if statements with this thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me say enter yes or no, okay? Like we can probably do it with that one, right? So, because it's gonna be a string, right? And you can use integers later. I know somebody had a question on that, but that would require like casting, and we'll get into that like later. So I don't wanna talk about that right now, but let's think about in a string way, okay? So enter yes or no. You're gonna do if, let's change it to username to like decision or something like that, okay? So if decision equals, right? Yes, right? Does that make sense? And then I'm gonna do print, we will continue the game or something like that, right? And then I can have the else as, like that's basically when you enter no, as print, the game has ended, right? So if we run this, enter yes or no, I'm gonna enter yes. We will continue the game. And if I run it again, let's try another thing. If I enter no, it's gonna say the game has ended. Does that make more sense now?
Yeah.
Okay. And make sure, because it's gonna be a string, so make sure you use like quotations when you're saying like if decision is equal. Okay, any other questions? And remember, if you guys have any questions like later, you can just always ask in the Google Classroom and we'll get back to you on that. And also, if you guys have any questions like specific to your project, you can also ask on Google Classroom and we will also get back to you on that. We can also like maybe like spend like 5 or 10 minutes with you just answering questions that you have specific to your project. Okay, and I'll post all the homework on Google Classroom. As I said before, there's gonna be a specific homework just for concepts learned this week. And there's also gonna be a homework depending like with your individual project, like telling us like, okay, what progress can you make this week with what you learned today? So maybe like just like a bit of code that you can write out or like a piece of sample code or maybe even like a description would be good for that. Okay, any other questions?
Also I just wanted to mention for the independent project proposals, like the thing we posted last week, which is just like a little paragraph about your project. If so basically if it's approved, that means like we just put a grade of like 100 and we returned it back to you. So that means that it's approved. And if we have like any comments or something, we just wrote that like in the private comments. So just make sure like if you got yours back and it says 100, that means yours is approved. And there's still some we haven't gotten to today. So we'll just try to get that back to you guys as soon as possible.
Yeah. Okay. So if there's no more questions, then that's it for this week and we'll see you guys next Saturday, okay? Make sure you get all your homework done by then. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye, and thank you.